Hey, all, welcome back to Free to Disagree, Communal Sense. This is Reyes, and this is here Larry Young, as he was back here, and it has been a crazy week. We're going to discuss, me and Larry here, some issues about the squad. That's what Larry likes to call it. That's apparently what everybody's calling them on the Twitter feeds, if you will. And some of these quote-unquote racist comments that President Trump has made. What do you think of that, Larry?
Well, first of all, I would say, as with squad, that's actually not a term that I devised.
I know that.
That was a term that was devised by the women themselves. I understand that they went to an event that was held by Netroot Nations a couple of weeks ago, within the last few weeks, and at that event they came up with the term to describe themselves. But as regards to this whole incident, I would say that the squad by themselves certainly have invited some controversy. Controversy in the sense of people disagreeing with their political positions, with many of the comments that they themselves have made, particularly Omar and Ocasio-Cortez and Tlaib. A little bit less from Presley, but she's had some controversy.
Yeah, Presley has recently said some remarks on that I heard on IGTV that were pretty shocking. Now, I wouldn't consider them racist per se, but I would say they're filled with the identity politics, the plague of identity politics, aka postmodernism, which is what it's rooted in. But when she was pretty much explaining that if you're not brown, or if you're brown, you need to have that brown voice. If you're Jewish, and you need that Jewish voice, etc., etc. I don't think she said Jewish and the Jewish voice, but she was explaining along the lines along those lines, and that's something I didn't agree with. However, AOC and Omar have been the most vocal, I would say, especially Omar lately. Considering you can at least assume that the remarks that President Trump had said about having to go back to the countries they talk about and having to fix those issues and coming back to him or here the U.S. and depicting how you would fix that. That was, I would say, implicitly implied to her. So that's how I feel about that. Though I do feel that people have mistreated that comment and have gone off the rails in misrepresenting what they represent for the left. By people, I mean society and people in general.
Well, what I would say is that the comments by President Trump, they fit into a pattern of behavior on his part that goes back, of course, obviously, to before he announced his run for the presidency, and particularly have continued since he has been in office. I would say that the argument that's been made in terms of telling people to go back, the argument that's been made is that this is something, and we could have obviously maybe some familiarity with it. This is something that has been said previously. People, when directing attacks against people of color, for example, they would, someone who was racist would tell someone during the civil rights movement, a civil rights protester, go back to Africa, or they would tell an Asian immigrant, go back to Korea, or whatever have you. And so what many people were doing when hearing this from Trump, they were interpreting this as meaning, well, he'd say, well, go back to your country. So for Omar, in particular, that would be relevant. And so I think on the whole, just because of the history behind these sorts of comments, the fact that comments of these nature do not help Trump at all, they detract from his policy agenda, they detract from his administration, that it was wrong for him to have said it. I think that it was definitely a strategic mistake, and just morally, it was well beyond the pale. However, at the same time, while I believe these women have the right to present their views, and they should not be attacked in a manner suggesting that they are not truly American, at the same time, we can't excuse some of what they said.
No.
Because they've also said things that many people have taken offense to, particularly Omar with her anti-Semitic comments. I would say that those by themselves shouldn't be defended. So in other words, it's ironic because Trump was criticized for saying both sides, but it is true here to an extent that that both sides have said things
right,
of questionable value.
And with as long as or as far as the quote unquote both sides go, as you put it said, and yeah, it has. Whenever you say both sides, it does raise criticism. So I try to avoid saying well both sides are wrong because that's a very simplistic way of putting it, and then you leave yourself up with open criticism. So instead of saying that, rather two wrongs don't make it right. For instance, President Trump, when he said he literally nowhere in his tweet did he mention anything about they need to go back to their country. That was not in the tweet. What was in the tweet was something that implied more of go back to the country where you came from, fix the problems that are there, then come back and tell us how you fix that so that they can actually fix whatever they foresee the problem here to be. So that is something the left, I would say, misinterpreted, or not. I don't even want to say they misinterpreted because that would imply they did it accidentally. I believe they purposely interpreted it that way so that they can put out the rhetoric that he said, send them back, and that's when the chants started going. And then as far as the right, I think the right went overboard whenever they started chanting, send her back during that rally. And he, when Trump condemned him, because he did eventually condemn that chant by saying he was not happy with it, and he tried to quicken the pace out of that rhetoric. So then he tried to come back talking faster than he did, so that he could drown out or at least ignore those chants. So I think the fact that it's yes, I don't agree with anything the squad says. Well, I would say most of anything that the squad says. But however, I don't think that people, I'm not talking about politicians or President Trump, I think people in society, in American society, aren't giving them a fair game as far as they have a right to say that. For instance, you have people who say, well, they should go back to where they came from as if that's the only option if you want change. However, the U.S. Constitution explicitly states that in the First Amendment, the right to freedom of speech and right to, well, just basically the First Amendment. It gives them the right to protest, gives them the right to free speech, and one of the ways to change things is by running for office and getting elected. And that's exactly what they did. So you got to respect at least that motion that they put in place. Now you can disagree with what they say, but the best way to do that is to combat with the war of ideas. And I think people just don't do that these days. It's this for that and insults for insults, and it just leaves discussion out of the way. And I think that's part of the problem with the right and the left. Two wrongs just don't make a right.
That's certainly true. Though I would say for the rally, what actually happened at least at the rally in North Carolina, where Trump supporters, they broke out into a racist chant. You could describe it as a racist chant. Send her back, which of course that is just that is unacceptable in my view. Is not once again, it does not contribute anything, and it feeds into that sort of tradition of those sorts of comments. Now, I don't think Trump effectively rebutted what those people said. The reason why I say that is during the actual rally, if you see the video clip, what happened was that he was going with his speech, with one of his attacks against Omar, and they started breaking out into the chant, send her back, as if it was, a sort of bombast. But he just stood there for maybe about 10 or 15 seconds. I think it was about 13 seconds, and while the chant was going on. And then once the chant stopped, he continued with his speech. And then the following day, he said, well, I don't agree with what they said. But then the day after, he said, well, these are patriots.
Yeah.
So
that's exactly the tweet I was just showing.
So Trump's response to that situation also leaves much to be desired. And the irony, I would say this, and this is a very true observation, is comments like these from him are a major part of the reason why his approval ratings are so poor. Because many people do not see him as being mature enough to be president. They believe that his comments are incendiary. They do not think he represents the office well. And so a lot of these voters are ambiguous towards him and are not willing to say, well, that they personally approve of him. Then, of course, you have voters who agree with his policies, but they don't like his personality.
That's me.
So,
yeah, I agree with that last part. You said people agree with his policies, but don't agree with his personalities. However, That's me, and that would be Amanda's one. I literally am disgusted with the way he presents himself and the way he's done that whole troll job. Is for instance, this morning, I'm not even sure how accurate it is, and I can have Amanda check that for me. But she also said, President Trump also put out a line of plastic straws just to troll the left on the ban on plastic straws in California in particular. So
I didn't hear about that.
yeah,
It surprised me.
I saw that on Facebook just briefly, so I'm not sure. And I saw it was I believe it was CNN or Time that it was the article on. So I'm not sure how accurate that is. But even that feeds more onto how he just likes to troll the left rather than explain his policies. Yeah, it says Trump is fighting liberal paper straws with $15 plastic set during his campaign. Well, it's just ridiculous. I mean, it's like, why would you do that just to give more fuel to the fire? And I get what Trump is doing. He's just trying to rile up the crowd. He's trying to rile up his base. However, I hate the way he does that. It doesn't. His policies are not enough to justify the way he acts while he's in office, and I fully will stand behind that.
I certainly agree with that. Now, as to Squad themselves, as we mentioned that they've made some controversial remarks. I think you were saying before, Presley, I think it was at the Netroot Nations conference,
I think so.
she was making the remark that if you're not a brown voice, you should not represent brown people. If you're not a queer voice, you shouldn't represent queer people. So she was referring to gay people, obviously minorities, and those sorts of that sort of comment doesn't help either, because then you're suggesting, well, everybody, if you're Hispanic, you must support illegal immigration. If you're black, you must support criminal justice reform or police brutality. If you're Asian, you must support these causes. If you're gay, you must be in favor of the Equality Act. That is the implication that she's drawn.
Right.
And Omar, when she came back to Minnesota after Trump was going after her, Omar called Trump a fascist. And then Ocasio-Cortez, saying, of course, she said so many things that there's far beyond number. And then Tlaib, of course, talking about impeach the MF. And she reiterated. Now, there was actually, this past week, there was a resolution that was proposed by Representative Al Green of Texas. He's done this many times, trying to impeach. Yes.
And that failed at the House, though. So.
It failed by a big margin. A great many Democrats joined with the entire Republican caucus in voting against it.
Well, it's no use to them either. It's literally a waste of time. So I can see why the Democrats would even vote against that. So, but either or, we're talking going back to the Squad. I think they're just playing the whole role of identity politics, and identity politics is just a horrible way to play it, because it's basically saying, well, if you belong to this group, then we're playing the collective above the individual. You're not an individual anymore. You're just part of the collective. So your individual thoughts and ideas have no say if they differ from the collective. And I think identity politics just play in both sides. Again, I hate saying both sides, but two wrongs don't make a right. The right's do the same thing. If you're not a Trumper or a trumpet or a Trumpist, if you will, you're not a true Republican. I've been called that on Twitter so many times. I've been called the plague of the conservative movement. So I think what's that?
A rhino.
Oh! I've been called rhino so many times. So I think one of the things we need to do as a society and as people is start policing up each side. The left needs to police themselves up. The right needs to police themselves up. And we need to get not discourse, but more of let's attack the idea rather than attack the people. So that's basically what I feel needs to be done.
I certainly agree with you. I think this was a very insightful look into this whole situation, and we'll see how things develop from here. It's a pleasure talking with you again.
Likewise.
And next time, hopefully the next podcast, we will go more into these sorts of issues.
Likewise, and hopefully Amanda can take us away from here.